It was the grandest ship the world had ever seen. The RMS Titanic, unsinkable, majestic, and a marvel of early 20th century engineering. But what if it wasn't the Titanic that sank in the icy waters of the North Atlantic on April 15, 1912? According to one of the most controversial and enduring conspiracy theories, the ship that went down wasn't the Titanic, but her sister ship, the RMS Olympic. In the early 1900s, the White Star Line, a prominent British shipping company, commissioned 3 Olympic-class ocean liners, Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. The Olympic launched first in 1911. She was nearly identical to the Titanic, though built slightly earlier. But during her service, she collided with the British warship HMS Hawke. The damage was extensive. The Olympic was forced back to dry dock, where it underwent costly and time-consuming repairs. Here's where the theory begins to take shape. Some researchers and theorists believe the White Star Line, burdened with a crippled Olympic and fearful of financial ruin, orchestrated a bold insurance scam. The theory suggests that the Titanic and Olympic were secretly switched in the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland. The Titanic, which was still being fitted out at the time, would become the Olympic, and the damaged Olympic, now disguised as the Titanic, would set out on her maiden voyage and be deliberately sunk. The plan? Stage an accident, evacuate the ship, and collect a massive insurance payout while saving the newer ship from destruction. Supporters of this theory point to several anomalies. First, the structural similarities between the Olympic and Titanic made such a switch theoretically possible. The ships were built side by side and were nearly identical in size, layout, and construction. Second, the timelines. The Olympic was returned to dry dock just as the Titanic was nearing completion. Proponents argue that this overlap offered a perfect window of opportunity for a switch to take place without raising suspicion. During this period, minor structural alterations could have been made to disguise the switch. Portholes could be changed, bulkheads moved, and minor design features swapped. Photos have been used to support the theory. Some images of the ship that sailed as the Titanic reportedly show porthole configurations that match the Olympic. In one specific case, the number of portholes on the sea deck of Titanic in early construction photos is different from those seen on the ship during her voyage. Then there's the mysterious cancellation of J.P. Morgan's journey. Morgan, a powerful financier and owner of the International Mercantile Marine Company, which owned White Star Line, had booked a lavish suite aboard the Titanic. But at the last moment he canceled, citing health concerns. Strangely, he was later seen in good health in France, relaxing with his mistress. This has led many to believe Morgan knew something was about to happen. More curious still, several other high-profile figures also canceled their reservations right before departure. Other curious points are often raised. The nameplates on the shipwreck at the bottom of the ocean are missing or corroded beyond recognition, making it difficult to definitively confirm whether the wreck is the Titanic or Olympic. Some claim that metal parts recovered from the site bear the hull number 401, Titanic's build number, while others argue conflicting evidence suggests parts from the Olympic. Critics of the theory argue that the differences between the two ships, though minor, would have been obvious to the crew and passengers. They also highlight the logistical challenges of switching such massive ships without detection. Shipbuilders, sailors, and engineers would have had to be complicit or completely oblivious. Still, believers argue that secrecy could be maintained among a few high-ranking officials, and that shipyard workers may have simply assumed that the modifications being made were standard alterations during final outfitting. Another claim surrounds the mysterious behavior of the Titanic during sea trials. Some say they were shorter than expected and did not match the thorough testing usually conducted for a brand new vessel. Was it because the ship was actually the older Olympic already tried and tested at sea? Then there are rumors about the cargo. The Titanic was carrying 3,000 sacks of mail, a large number of luxury goods, and allegedly a mysterious cargo of unknown origin. Theories suggest this cargo may have played a role in the supposed plan, perhaps something that needed to be lost or destroyed. And finally, there are survivor testimonies. Some survivors described oddities, unusual noises, strange behavior by crew members, or aspects of the ship that didn't match what had been publicized. None of this is concrete proof, but together, these pieces form a puzzle that continues to fascinate and disturb more than a century later.
April 14, 1912, a night that has echoed through history, immortalized in books, films, and memories. But for those who believe in the Titanic Olympic switch theory, this night was not just a tragedy, it was the climax of a carefully orchestrated plan. The ship that struck an iceberg and began its final descent into the North Atlantic may not have been Titanic at all, they argue. It was the older, damaged Olympic, sent to sea under a false name to secure a massive insurance payout. Let's break down the events of that fateful night and the questions they raise. The iceberg collision occurred at approximately 11:40 p.m. The ship was traveling at near top speed, over 22 knots, despite multiple warnings of ice fields. Why such haste? Some theorists believe the ship was behind schedule, while others suggest a more sinister motive. If the ship was to be sunk, it needed to be far from help. Yet some argue it wasn't meant to sink at all. The theory suggests the plan was to stage a controlled accident, a collision, an evacuation, and a rescue by a nearby ship, namely the Californian. The SS Californian was within 10-20 miles of the Titanic's last reported position. Her wireless operator had gone to bed shortly before the Titanic began calling for help. Crew aboard the Californian reportedly saw strange lights and distress rockets, but did not respond. Why? Some believe the Californian was part of the plan, positioned nearby to assist in the rescue, but communication breakdowns, unexpected cold, or human error disrupted the scheme. What was meant to be a clean insurance fraud spiraled into mass tragedy. Then there are the flares. Survivor accounts describe white rockets being launched into the sky. Red flares were the standard international signal for distress. White flares were often used in celebrations or non-emergency situations. Why were the wrong flares used? Was it confusion, or was the signal meant for someone who knew what white flares meant that night? Now consider the binoculars. The lookout in the crow's nest had no binoculars, the key to spotting hazards ahead. They had been locked away, and the keys were missing due to a last-minute change in crew. A tragic oversight, or something more deliberate. And then, the collision itself. Many survivors described it not as a thunderous crash, but as a glancing bump or vibration. Could such a minor impact really tear through multiple watertight compartments in a brand new ship? Or was the ship already structurally weakened, perhaps from previous damage sustained by the Olympic? According to the theory, the ship that sank was not only older, but also more fragile than reported. This would explain the rapid flooding and collapse of bulkheads not designed to withstand the stress. Further, reports emerged of strange behavior by crew members. Some passengers recalled confusion, hesitation, and contradictory orders during evacuation. Lifeboats were lowered half full. Men were allowed to board in violation of the Women and Children First protocol. Some theorists argue this was because the crew had been briefed on a fake emergency drill, not a real disaster. Now consider the passengers. Some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the world were aboard. Yet several canceled at the last minute. J.P. Morgan, George Vanderbilt, and others. Coincidence? Or a sign that those in the know stayed away? When the ship went down, over 1,500 people perished. Most froze in the frigid water. Many died after being refused entry to already half-empty lifeboats. Could the disorganized rescue effort have been the result of a failed scam? After the tragedy, both British and American inquiries concluded that the ship had hit an iceberg and sunk due to poor navigation decisions. No mention was made of any potential ship switcher fraud. Yet critics point to the limited scope of the investigations and the rushed nature of the conclusions. Harland and Wolff, the shipbuilder, was never closely scrutinized. White Star Line officials faced no major charges. Some say the shipwreck itself holds the final answer. When Robert Ballard discovered the Titanic's remains in 1985, it was hailed as confirmation of the official story. But even that has been questioned. Were these anomalies the result of years underwater, or something else? Others argue the ship's weak keel and visible signs of prior repairs are further hints that it may not be the Titanic at all. Was it the greatest maritime disaster in history, or something darker? The wreckage and revelation. In the aftermath of the Titanic disaster, grief turned to questions, and questions turned into theories. Over 2,500 people had perished. Yet for some, the tragedy was more than a maritime accident. It was a cover-up for something much larger. The Titanic's sinking in 1912 sparked immediate global mourning. But as the years passed and details emerged, small inconsistencies began to stir doubt. Was it truly the Titanic that sank, or had the Olympic been sent to its watery grave? Survivors told their stories. Investigations were launched in both Britain and the United States. Committees gathered testimonies, examined ship blueprints, and reviewed the timeline. Officially, the verdict was straightforward. An iceberg caused a fatal rupture in multiple compartments, overwhelming even the most advanced ship of its time. But conspiracy theorists argue the inquiries were incomplete, biased, and even manipulated. Harland and Wolff, the shipbuilders, were barely scrutinized. The White Star Line was never formally charged. The investigations focused on safety protocols and human error, not fraud or foul play. And then there's the wreck. In 1985, famed oceanographer Robert Ballard located the remains of the Titanic at the bottom of the Atlantic, nearly 13,000 feet deep. The discovery was celebrated worldwide. Skeptics hoped the wreck would finally confirm the truth once and for all. But the wreck raised new questions. Some images from the dive showed inconsistencies, most famously the placement and number of portholes along the ship's hull. Early Titanic photos showed a certain pattern, while images of the wreck seemed to match the Olympic's design. Supporters of the switch theory argue this is compelling physical evidence that the wrong ship lies on the ocean floor. Then there's the hull number debate. Each ship had a construction number. Titanic was 401, Olympic was 400. Artifacts recovered from the site were marked with the number 401, seemingly confirming the ship's identity. But critics of the theory argue that if a switch had occurred, such obvious identifiers would have been replaced as well. One of the most persistent stories is that of the brass letters on the wreck. Some divers claim that under layers of corrosion, they saw signs that the name Titanic had been retrofitted, letters allegedly attached over recessed markings that could have originally spelled Olympic. These claims remain unverified, yet they continue to fuel debate. Further intrigue came with the Britannic, Titanic's younger sister ship, which also sank in 1916 under mysterious circumstances. She was converted into a hospital ship during World War I and struck a mine in the Aegean Sea. Some wonder if she too was part of a larger insurance strategy, though there is less evidence to support this. And still, the core question remains unanswered. Why would the White Star Line risk everything to swap two ships? For believers, the answer is simple: financial desperation. The Olympic's accident with the HMS Hawk had left it damaged and uninsurable. A catastrophic loss would bankrupt the company. Swapping the ships, sinking the Olympic in Titanic's place, and collecting the insurance money was seen as a last resort. But skeptics point out flaws. The Titanic was underinsured. The cost of outfitting the Olympic to pass as Titanic may have outweighed any payout. And the risks involved, loss of life, exposure, criminal charges, were astronomical. Still, to this day, the debate rages on. Books, documentaries, and online forums keep the theory alive. Some call it a fascinating mystery. Others call it disrespectful to the victims. But for many, it's a case study in how history is written, revised, and sometimes questioned. In the century since the ship sank, the Titanic has become more than a vessel. It is a symbol of hubris and perhaps of secrets buried deep beneath the waves. Was it the Titanic or was it the Olympic? The answer may never be known for sure, but the legend endures. Thank you for joining us in this three-part journey into the iceberg of one of history's most enduring mysteries. Whatever you believe, fact, theory, or somewhere in between, the Titanic story reminds us, sometimes the truth lies not in what we're told, but in what still doesn't add up.